Griffin on human rights, part 2, highest level rights. We are now on chapter 9, liberty. Um, well, there's that famous expression, give me liberty or give me death. What does that mean? So obviously some people think it's really important, and Griffin is one of them. Liberty, again, is one of the 3 bedrock values, and the human right to liberty protects liberty because ultimately it's going to be part of our normativity. And being a normative agent is something that really, that's sort of the ground, the whole thing that Griffin's views of human rights is tied to. Okay, so but liberty is broad, right? It's a broad concept, and there's been lots of different understandings of liberty. And Isaiah Berlin has that famous essay where he talks about a couple different concepts of liberty. Mill talks endlessly about liberty. On Liberty is often his one of his major works, although he didn't think it was a major work of his. But history has more or less attributed Mill's work On Liberty to Mill as one of Mill's major works. So what's all the fuss about liberty? Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and all that stuff. Well, the broad sense of it is, well, you're infringing on my liberty is any infringing on my action, right? That violates my liberty. Well, okay, if you have that broad of a notion, but that's not going to work very well if you want to get serious about human rights, to just say, well, but the notion of liberty that's built in to the human rights, and protecting my autonomy and my normativity is going to be that broad. Like I get to do whatever I want to do. That's going to be, that's just untenable. Okay, except on some sort of, kind of egoistic view or whatever. But to do it, human rights within some kind of society, you're going to need some sorts of constraints. The problem is not so much will you need constraints. I think that's pretty, not too terribly controversial. The controversial stuff is what kind of constraints are you going to put on liberty? And that is to make it a little narrow. So we're going to impose some constraints in order to think about human rights in a context, right? So liberty is going to deal with a part of us, not just anything that crosses our mind. So that, whatever I want to do thing, no. So let's start off with an easy one, like a formal constraint, and which is kind of, Griffin just sort of pulls this in, but, based on the idea that we're all equal, right? So there's an equality, an egalitarianism underneath it all, that nobody's intrinsically better, there's no such thing as, having special royal blood or anything like that. We're all just people. Maybe we're all wonderful or all terrible, but we're all on the same kind of level. So in other words, when I talk about my liberty, it has to have some reference to yours and vice versa. So our liberties have to kind of fit in some way. They have to be co-possible. Remember, we talked about co-possibility earlier. So, and of course, it's the old, the reference of the right of my fist ends where the right of your nose begins, right? That's co-possibility, that liberties are tucked up, and they might be fairly strict and bordering on absolute or whatever, maybe not, but at least they're non-overlapping domains. But two domains can be non-overlapping, but they share a border, so they have a connection. They refer to each other, right? And so their borders between the two help to define both of them. Okay, so it can have a formal constraint. It can have another kind of constraint, and we've seen talk of this now gets us into negative and positive stuff about rights and freedoms. You have your liberty, you've got the pursuit of liberty, right? It's not full realization, so you don't get everything out of the deal. You have a right, in the American political thought, you have the right to pursue happiness. You don't have the right to be happy, right? So it's not that people have to make you happy. You just have the liberty and the opportunity to pursue it, right? And we'll talk about what that means in a second. But it's got a somewhat positive notion to it, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. But it's just, think about it as the pursuit of liberty, not the full realization, because that seems to be overly positive in terms of like positive and negative in terms of rights, like positive and negative rights. In other words, you when you have a negative right, it's not always clear what the negativity necessarily means. Sometimes it's like, well, the negative aspect is that if you're going to have a right to liberty, people should get out of your way while you're pursuing it. So even if you put all these other constraints, with that considered, people should stay out of your way, and that sounds good. So to stay out of the way of my liberty sounds good. But this is not always clear, because some things can obstruct liberty, and even the law recognizes this, and they call it a chilling effect, so that people might be technically free to do X, Y, and Z, but there's always the possibility that they might be punished. There's always sort of the possibility that there's a power lurking in the corner that might come out and hit you if you do this. And so there's a chilling effect. So it's technically, the power's not really in your way, but it might be in your way and it might not. That has a chilling effect on your liberty. So so it's a bit ambiguous as to, or a little bit vague as to what, the negative aspects of staying out of the way will really mean. Okay, so that people can be, if the power could come out and strike you, that can have chilling effects where you won't do something or you won't say something. It's like, well, if you say that, you might get into trouble. I don't know, take your chances. That has a chilling effect as well. So the liberty, the pursuit thing might have to have a bit of power in it in terms of positive mechanisms, and not just simply be in this kind of, well, we're not going to do anything, get in the way kind of thing, because that's not entirely a clear concept. What's also interesting is Griffin's discussion that, remember that though, there's so much stuff going on, it's easy to get lost in all the terminology, but we're trying to protect people's normative nature. That is they're normative agents. And what is a normative agent? Once again, it's the ability to have this capacity, this autonomy to conceive of a worthwhile life, to conceptualize one, and then to go off and pursue it, right? So that's essentially what human rights are trying to protect, is that capacity. And so, but think about this. Let's think a little bit more about, people's capacity to form conceptions of worthwhile lives. You can form lots of them. Are they all equally valid? Are they all, this is where you get into realization problems. So I took Griffin's discussion and tried to condense it a little bit, and this is what I came up with. So if we let this see, conceptualization of a worthwhile life, and there can be different ones. So that little x is a variable that could stand for different ones. So let's say, so I'm following Griffin's discussion here. He says, when he was younger, he had the conceptualization of a worthwhile life as a philosopher. So, and it seems that his parents weren't too pleased with that. Well, we all know that one. I think most philosophers can point to that. But in any case, connected to this conceptualization, which is a very abstract thing, which is produced through your autonomy. Now you want the liberty to kind of go after it, right? So some kind of a pursuit of it. You're not going to be guaranteed it. But what about a realistic pursuit of it? Well, every conceptualized worthwhile life is going to have, for society, a difficulty of realization, like for society to create that path. Okay, so if you form the idea of, I want to be a philosopher, I want to be a philosophy teacher and write papers and make videos and teach courses and blah, 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 and all that stuff. Okay, fine, that's what you want to do. But of course, you might not be guaranteed, of course, to get the job, right? So you can try and pursue it. But even if you think about it, society has to have jobs for philosophers, right? It doesn't matter. You can pick other things. The reason why I think Griffin uses philosopher is, well, one, he is one, but also they're kind of hard jobs to find. Okay, so why? Because there's only so many of them. Why? Because society doesn't necessarily need as many philosophers, let's say, as lawyers or nurses. There's a lot of other jobs that would be connected to the would be part of the conceptualization of a worthwhile life. So one could be a lawyer or nurse or I don't know, pick a variety of them. Like an ambulance driver, something like that, paramedic, and so on. So you'll have these various CWWs with their little subscript, philosopher, lawyer, and all that, and then each of them will have for society a corresponding difficulty of realization. So and now if you wanted to make it where it was really a complete equality of opportunity, level playing field, so that whatever CWW someone came up with, it would all be kind of an equal opportunity. So like you'd have to say, well, all of these, if you wanted to be a philosopher, it might be a tough route, but it's not any tougher overall than becoming a lawyer or something like that. If you wanted to make complete equality of opportunity, we're not even talking about outcomes, we're just talking about complete equality of opportunity, that would be, Griffin says, like a heavy load to demand of society, because society just doesn't need equal numbers of individuals, regardless of their talent, regardless of everything. They just don't need as many philosophers as they do paramedics, right? But if you said, no, wait, according to a principle, like you'd be saying, oh, no, it should be equal opportunity, society would have to really, it could be economically extremely difficult for a society to give as many jobs in every area to make it all equal, the equality of opportunity. So now you might say, and this is sort of the background, you might say, well, so what? Just because you want to be something, that doesn't mean society has to, provide some kind of a path. And this is Griffin's point, is that there's going to be some sort of levels of these CWWs, right? And some of them will be deeper than others. So maybe a particular career path might not really be something that's integrated into the deep CWW ones. Maybe there are deeper ones. And what we're really talking about is, sometimes you might have to switch from one to the other. You had a dream of becoming, whatever, an Air Force pilot or whatever, and you wanted to drive the latest generation of jets. Well, how many jobs are there in that? Even for people that are really good, there just may not be that many, and society needs more people who are, engineers, right? Where you think about a great example is, only a couple of guys got into the lunar module to go to the moon. There's 3 of them. And the ground crew is much larger. So maybe you don't get to be the astronaut, you get to be a ground technician or something like that. So that you might have to switch from one CWWX to another CWWY. But the important point is not maybe which one you pick, but it's the capacity and to live in a society where there are meaningful choices amongst these CWWs, even though fulfilling each of them might be drastically different. And we're not talking about quotas here. We're just talking about opportunity, right? It just may not be that each of these CWWs has equal opportunity. Some just might be much, much harder to get into, period, whether or not you even succeed, but even have the opportunity. So there's going to be a big difference there. So there's not a human right really to even opportunity in general, because some just might be a lot tougher. Now that doesn't solve all the issues surrounding opportunity, but there is a little bit of what determines all this? Well, this is kind of the play of fortune. And Griffin says, part of life is you deal with it's an old cliche, you got to play the hand that you're dealt in life. Societies have to play the hands that they're dealt with. So we can, do some modifications to, shall we say, societies can modify fortune and misfortune in some ways, but there's just only so much that can be done. And so when you talk about human rights, you have to always embed your discussion within this level of realization, this difficulty of realization issue. So once we move from these, prudence and all that to the domain of morality and human rights, we're in the domain of policy, and empirical results are important. Empirical situations, sociological situations, human situations, they all play a role. But there might be, what do I mean by these deep CWWs? They might be things like, let's say, I don't know, use Griffin's example, like finding love in your life, and you're in a society where you can express that, and you don't have to pick different ones. So if you're of a certain orientation, your society is not going to say, sorry, you can't be like that. You got to change that. That would be like a deep CWW that should be protected. And that is something that like if you're gay, you're not told to be straight or something like that. That's living a life where like being gay or something like that. That would be something that human rights would fence and protect that, because that's not the same thing as just a choice between being a philosopher or a pilot or a lawyer, right? So there is a notion of deeper levels of these things, and that would be something that would be protected, and you may have to, but not in every case, be switching from one CWW to a different one. So it is, yes. So society can help with reversing some of the bad fortunes, help with leveling things out. There's only so much it can do, and it's going to go after protecting these deep CWWs that I've been talking about. And so the positive side is not always easy to ascertain, because remember, it just tends to get larger and larger. But there are all kinds of formal and material conditions that have to be imposed on the notion of liberty, so that you're not way out in the wilderness with this broad one, but you've got some kind of manageable one that's going to be constrained, but yet it's not going to cut into and not protect these things at all.